alluded to reflects the following: that just after 1 a.m. on that morning, a deputy in West Sedgwick County, or West Wichita rather, was conducting routine patrol. He noticed a car ahead of him that was kind of crossing or hugging the center line, was not maintaining a single lane of traffic. He initiated his dash cam MVR. When that happens, it backs up 30 seconds, so it caught all of the traffic infractions as well. He initiated a car stop just west of Northwest High School there on 1100 block of Tyler Road. The dash camera picks up the entire exchange between the two. The deputy approaches the car, tells him why he stopped him. It's really a fairly routine car stop. You can't hear much of what the young man says, but you can hear him speaking back. You hear him say his name's Caleb. At one point the deputy asks, have you been drinking anything, you intoxicated? And the reason I ask is I smell marijuana. I can't hear on the tape what Caleb responded, but the deputy was later interviewed and said that the young man said, well, I do smoke marijuana. At which point the deputy asked him, why don't you go ahead and step out of the vehicle? The vehicle begins to roll just briefly, maybe a few feet. The deputy steps back toward the door and says, hey, put it in park for me. Sounded to me like he said, put it in park for me, bud. Words to that effect, at least. At which point the driver can be seen coming up with an object, leaning out the door. The deputy responds verbally, says words to the effect, oh shit, turns and starts to run back toward his car. The driver, if you pay attention, can be seen leaning out further. We've got still photos here as a part of my release. The deputy, again, later interviewed, describes it looks as though the driver is reaching on the slide of the handgun, trying to manipulate the slide. The deputy says, I don't know if he was trying to rack one in the chamber. If one wasn't, there was a problem. All I know is his hand was up on the slide. The deputy spins when he's 6-8 steps back to the south and turns and begins to fire. The car moves forward, brake lights come on, comes to a complete stop just momentarily, and then off it goes and travels, I'll estimate, 3/4 of a mile to the north through 13th and Tyler when it wrecks. At which point WPD officers fall in. They're actually the first ones to pursue. Initially they pulled over another car, not really seeing that just to the west on Tyler the suspect Pontiac had been, as the sheriff mentioned earlier, wrecked into the side of the house. WPD officers respond to the car. There's a fire in the engine compartment, and so that officers and deputies are quickly trying to get Mr. Douglas out of the car because it's a substantial fire, you can see. And as they do so, one of the officers from WPD says he sees a gun at the floorboard of the driver's side, so just at the feet of where Mr. Douglas would have been seated as he's driving. A WPD officer goes back in despite the fire and pulls that gun out. The gun that was found, it's a .40 caliber, was found at the, again, floorboard of the driver's feet. The deputy's 9mm, which he used that evening, both were secured and submitted for examination. The autopsy conducted the next day retrieved a projectile from the head of Mr. Douglas. There was also a fragment collected from his left shoulder. The ballistics expert says that the projectile collected from the cranial cavity of Mr. Douglas was actually fired from the .40 caliber that was found in his car, his own weapon. The round taken from his shoulder is a fragment. It's not of a comparable value in terms of being able to say conclusively which weapon it was fired from, but class characteristics, size, etc. tell us it was not fired by the .40 caliber that Mr. Douglas had in his possession. So, process of eliminations, I can't say by virtue of forensic ballistics analysis that it's fired by the deputy, but that's the only thing left, so it's got to be. So that leads us to today. When the autopsy was filed, again last week, the conclusion in the autopsy report concludes, and I'll quote here, the projectile recovered from the decedent's brain matched the above-mentioned handgun recovered from the decedent's vehicle. The above-mentioned being the .40 caliber taken from Mr. Douglas's car. As a result, the coroner ruled this a suicide. It is a little unusual for the district attorney to stand up and weigh in on a suicide. I don't typically do that, of course, but because this was an officer-involved shooting and because the deputy did shoot and, again, by process of elimination did strike, we believe struck Mr. Douglas in the left shoulder. It was a non-fatal injury. It was certainly would not have caused him to lose his life. And because there had been a public statement in the past wherein the impression would have been left that the deputy caused the death, when in fact that's now we know not to have been the case. The sheriff and I thought it was appropriate to have this conference today, explain the findings, and I'll transition now to the shooting relative to the shoulder. Because the deputy did shoot him in the shoulder, it's appropriate for me to weigh in on whether or not the deputy should face any charges in that respect. Kansas case law is very clear about one's right to self-defense, whether you're a police officer or a civilian. The case law, the statutes are cited in this handout, or release rather, and it's very clear that one has the right to defend oneself from imminent use of unlawful force. What the deputy found himself with, as he put it in his own words, looking down the barrel of a gun as he walked up to a car stop that was up until that point routine in every way. The deputy even says, when I smelled marijuana, I kind of looked in around the car thinking maybe I'd see pipes or something associated with marijuana. He saw nothing, obviously saw no weapon either. The first time he saw the weapon when he was staring down the barrel of that weapon. Based upon those facts, those circumstances, there is no evidence whatsoever to suggest that the deputy acted in an unreasonable manner when defending himself, and as such I've determined that he will face no charges for discharging his firearm at the car of Mr. Douglas. This will conclude the matter from a legal standpoint, as the sheriff alluded to, and I have zero role in and won't comment on, but obviously the sheriff's department will conduct their own internal assessment of whether or not the deputy acted appropriately per policy. But as far as the criminal laws of the state of Kansas, the deputy will face no charge.